welcome back to my channel. I know I'm starting January's mini-series a little bit late, but I'm sure it's one you guys are going to be very excited about. So I don't keep you waiting any longer. The mini-series for January is serial killers. So I will say, for my own safety, I am not covering anyone who is still out there. I know a lot of you guys really want me to talk about a few serial killers that are still not caught, but due to me wanting to continue on living life and spreading awareness, I've chosen to not talk about those specific people. I know a lot of you guys are probably going to be a little bit disappointed about that, but I'm hoping you can understand my reasonings behind it. But on that note, I promise you guys all of the serial killers that I'm going to be talking to you about in these different videos are very, very interesting. And the first one I'm going to start off with is the female serial killer from the 18 and early 1900s known as Belle Gunness. She also is known to some as Lady Bluebeard, but she's really not a very well-known serial killer. I actually had to dig a little bit to find her, and I'm surprised, to say the least, because of the things that she managed to do when she was on her little spree, which lasted about 8 years, but a lot speculated started when she was only 17 years old. I will say the bulk of her story really started in the 1880s, and as y'all know, that was a very, very long time ago. There is information out there, but this is one of those stories that people probably have added on to throughout time to make it seem a little bit more interesting, make it really get people's attention. There are a ton of different researchers out there. There are so many different theories. There are so many different documentaries and movies about her, but every single one is kind of different. So I'm just going to tell you the one that I first read. And I highly encourage you guys, if you want to learn more about her, to continue researching on your own, because there are a lot of other possibilities as to how this whole story played out. So Belle is known as one of the most brutal Norwegian American serial killers. She grew up and spent most of her young life in Norway, and she did end up coming over, unfortunately, to all of the victims to America. She was a pretty robust woman. She stood at 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds, so she really stood out. As well as this, she was also always known as being incredibly physically strong. She was born sometime in November, again I couldn't really nail down a date, in 1859 in Selbu, Norway. Again, probably pronouncing that wrong. She was the youngest of 8, and her whole entire family lived on a working farm, so she had a pretty average childhood. It is said that there was a pretty specific event that really changed her and more than likely led her into the path she would soon take as a serial killer, but again, this is one of the biggest discrepancies, and there's never really been anything to prove that this actually happened. It really was just word of mouth added onto more word of mouth added onto more word of mouth that just passed around like a big old game of telephone. When she was 17 years old, she was newly pregnant, and she decided to go to this country dance concert, and unfortunately, while she was there, she ended up being attacked by a man who ended up kicking her in her stomach and caused her to miscarry. Now, this was absolutely devastating to her. Her friends say that she completely changed after this. She acted as if she was almost a completely different person. It wasn't just, oh, she's a little bit more sad than usual, or oh, she's just grieving. It was almost as if the old Belle was no longer there and was replaced by this new one. Now, the man who did this to her was very, very rich. And in these times, money, I guess just as much like in times now, money can get you places. And unfortunately, he was able to escape any sort of charges because his family was rich. However, very shortly after this entire situation, that same man ended up passing away pretty young of stomach cancer. Now, he was displaying a lot of symptoms that we now would kind of view as being poisoned, a lot of intestinal issues, gastro issues, but because of the day and age, they deemed it stomach cancer, and that was that. Nothing more was thought of it. So Belle continued on life as normal. She worked for about 3 years at a working farm to gain as much money as possible. One of her sisters had actually gone and moved to America, and she wanted to follow suit. Some people think she left for America because she was trying to run away from possibly killing this man after what he did to her. But other people think she was just simply following her sister. After saving enough money, she was able to come over to America in 1881. In 1884, she ended up marrying a man named Mads Sorensen, and they moved to Chicago, Illinois, and started up a confectionery shop. Now, this was extremely exciting for the both of them. She was married, she seemed to have nailed down a good business opportunity, but in less than a year of the shop being open, it was not doing well. It was losing them a ton of money. They were in a lot of debt, and very coincidentally, the whole entire building caught fire. It was really a mystery to anyone investigating the situation. They couldn't really nail down what started the fire, but the whole entire building was burned to the ground. They then collected all of the insurance money from this business that they had and the horrible disaster that took it from them, and then decided with that money to buy a home instead. Now, a lot of people for some reason don't believe that Belle and Mads had any children, but there was a United States Census in 1990 that recorded that Belle was a mother of 4. And there was an article in the New York Times about 2 of her children passing away, and we'll get more into that in a second. It also said on the census that they had a 10-year-old little girl that they had adopted under the name of Jenny living in their home. So she had birthed a total of 4 children, plus she had a 5th adopted child. The 2 children who died in infant stages died from something called acute colitis, and it presents very interesting symptoms of stomach pain, diarrhea, vomiting, fever, and both of these infants passed away from it. However, again, interestingly enough, those are the same type of symptoms as being poisoned. Then they had a 3-year-old daughter named Myrtle and another 1-year-old daughter named Lucy. One thing that people find strange is both Caroline and Axel, even from infant stages of their life, had life insurance. And while obviously that is an option, it's not a very common thing for people to do. When they passed away, Belle and Mads collected life insurance on them. Some years later, on July 30th, 1900, suddenly Mads, her husband, died as well. Now, a lot of people kind of just saw it at this point that her life was kind of followed by tragic events. Keep in mind the time frame here. People often went undiagnosed a lot. The whole field of medicine is nowhere what it was today, so unfortunately people did just kind of die at younger ages, and that's what everyone really expected it was. And also, he was being treated from their primary care doctor for an enlarged heart. So the first doctor that came in contact with him, I'm not sure if it was before or after his death, this doctor was 100% convinced that he had died from arsenic poisoning. I think the exact name of the poison he thought was strychnine, but this doctor was pretty sure of it. However, the primary care doctor again said, no, I've been treating him for an enlarged heart for so long that he more than likely just had heart failure. Now, since it wasn't deemed suspicious and just this one doctor had this crazy idea that he couldn't really back up, no autopsy was ever performed on Mads' body. And then a day after Mads' funeral, Belle went and collected immediately his insurance money. Many of Mads' relatives were almost just as positive as the first doctor that Belle had poisoned him. And there are actually records that still exist to this day that show that they asked for an investigation to happen, and one did start. However, the whole paper trail ends after that. So considering she ended up staying free and nothing more was said about it, we can all safely assume that they kind of dismissed all these accusations after a while and moved on. The insurance Belle got from Mads was $8,500, which to you right now doesn't sound like a lot. But again, when we take it back to that time era and compare it to what that would be equivalent to today, she was basically given $250,000 for his death. So she decided she was going to leave Illinois completely and buy herself a farm in LaPorte, Indiana. Now again, probably said that wrong. Don't butcher me in the comments. It'll be okay. During this time frame though, before she moved, while she was trying to kind of sell the house they had at the time and get the children together and prepare, she ended up becoming reacquainted with another recent widower that she had known before under the name of Belle Gunness. He was also Norwegian born. They bonded on a bunch of different levels and they decided to go out to Indiana together. Peter had 2 children from his previous marriage, so far he had her 2 biological children, her 1 adopted daughter, and his 2 children. A year after moving to the farm, they ended up getting married on April 1st, 1902. And oddly enough, a week after the ceremony, Peter's youngest daughter passed away from unknown causes. And the only thing they know for sure is that this little girl was under the sole care of Belle at the time. It was only her and the daughter in the home when it happened. And in December of 1902, just 7 months after Peter and Belle were married, he had a very bizarre accident that took his life. According to Belle, he was reaching for some slippers by their stove. He ended up knocking a big pot of boiling liquid on himself that had been on top of the stove. I guess she said he reacted by flailing around and hit off a sausage meat grinder from a shelf that then fell onto his head and killed him. After his death, she again collected $3,000 in life insurance money. Now at this point, despite people in Indiana not really knowing her past, everyone kind of already had her under a microscope because this man's daughter did pass away due to unknown circumstances while she was alone with her, and then now her husband has died of mysterious circumstances. No one was really believing her story at this point. Also, he was an experienced butcher. Being that clumsy, you know, managing to put yourself in a situation where you knock multiple things on top of you enough to kill you, granted, sometimes freak accidents do happen. He ran his own hog farm on the property and had literally spent his entire life being a butcher. He was so precise and steady with everything, so how come all of a sudden he was so clumsy? The district coroner ended up reviewing the case, and after he reviewed everything, he said he strongly believed that this man was actually murdered and it wasn't an accident after all. Somehow Belle convinced all the investigators that she had absolutely nothing to do with it and that it was an accident, and at the time she actually was pregnant with their first child together, and this kind of persuaded people to think there's no way she would have done something to this man. She's pregnant, first of all, she wouldn't be able to do anything physically, so everyone just kind of let it go. However, according to some people, her adopted daughter, Jenny, was not taking things very well. There are even some accounts of people claiming that Jenny was screaming, "You killed my papa, you killed my papa," over and over again, and she was pretty frantic afterwards. But again, those accounts are kind of like the whole telephone thing that we talked about before. In May of 1903, Belle ended up giving birth to her and Peter's son that she would go on to name Philip, and everything for a couple of years remained relatively calm, which was not very common when it came to this woman's life. However, in 1906, neighbors started noticing that they had not seen Jenny in a very alarmingly long time, so they decided to ask Belle where exactly she had gone. Now, some neighbors apparently were told that she was sent off to college in Los Angeles, while other neighbors were told that she was sent to a girls' refining school. 2 completely different things. But again, for some reason, no one really questioned anything. Then a year later, in 1907, Belle hired a man named Roy Lamphere to help around the farm. Also around this time, she started posting interesting advertisements on matrimonial columns in newspapers in Chicago and other big Midwestern cities. I actually have word for word one of her ads right here. She said, "Comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow answer with a personal visit. Triflers need not reply." So many men responded to her ad, and unfortunately this is when, to me, the killings really set off. And the next few parts of this video, pretty much from here on out, is going to be a little bit disturbing. So just a warning to those of you out there, it's a little bit graphic. So Proceed with caution. John Moe, I've seen his name a few different ways, was the first to come from his home in Minnesota, and he brought $1,000 with him to pretty much show his wealth. The strangest thing is that when she would take him around and introduce him to neighbors, it almost made it obvious she didn't plan on him being around long, because instead of saying, "This is a man I plan to marry, we're joining fortunes, we're, paying off my mortgage, doing this, doing that," she introduced him as her cousin. Within a week, he disappeared off her farm and was never seen again. Shortly after, a man named George Anderson showed up to her home from Missouri. They ate dinner together, everything seemed fine. She reminded this man that she needed some sort of money, proof that he was wealthy, and she mentioned that she needed her mortgage paid off. He agreed to this, so they agreed to get married, and that was that. Except that night when he was sleeping, he was horrifyingly woken up, and when he opened his eyes, Belle was standing over him, and he described the look on her face as the most horrifying and murderous thing he had ever seen in his entire life. The look on her face was so alarming to him that he vocally screamed so loud that it scared her so badly that she ran away. This was literally his saving grace. He threw his clothes on, left the rest of his stuff, and tore into town and got the next train back home. He didn't return for any of his stuff. He wanted nothing. He was petrified of this woman. He even said in some of his accounts of the story that when he was running away from the home, he tripped so many times because he was looking back over his shoulder because he swore she would be coming after him. That was just how scary the look on her face was when he woke up. He would be the only man that ever made it off of her farm alive. A man named Ole Budsberg was the next to leave his home and show up on her farm. The last time he was seen was in the Laporte Savings Bank on April 6th of 1907. He signed over a deed for his land and collected a couple $1,000s in cash. His own children had no idea where their father had gone, and after a little bit of searching, it's pretty much the same for every man that ended up coming to her home, families eventually realized that their loved one had not shown up back at home, so they did digging. His sons found that he went to Belle's home. They sent her a letter asking where their father was. She wrote back claiming she had never heard of him in her entire life. A couple of farmers nearby, so they started witnessing very bizarre things happening at the home. She ordered a couple of few very large trunks to her home, things that she wouldn't necessarily need, like an amount that she wouldn't need, and a couple of them even saw her digging late at night in the hog pens, which even though yes, she did run a farm, she did have a farmhand that was supposed to do that for her. Every time she was digging, it was incredibly late at night. Then another man sent a letter in December of 1907, and this man was Andrew Helgelin. I think I'm saying that right. He was sending letters back and forth, and as we know, that's specifically not what she wanted. And so in order to get him to actually come to her, she sent this incredibly overwhelming letter, basically professing her love to him. In January 1908, he also showed up at her farm. And he showed up at her farm with a check of $2,900 to prove that he was wealthy. Days later, he was seen at the savings bank, the same savings bank everyone had gone to. He deposited the check and left with the cash and was never seen again. And a few days after his appearance at the bank, Belle showed up as well. And she deposited $500 into the savings bank and then went to a separate state bank and deposited $700 there. But while all this was happening, she was starting to have a few problems with Ray. It was said that Ray had started to fall in love with her. He started making huge scenes whenever one of these men would come. He was incredibly jealous. He would try to scare them off the second they showed up and was really putting a kink into her plans, which obviously she was not very happy with. Because of this, she ended up firing him on February 3rd of 1908 and hired a man named Joe Maxon to take his place. However, which I will get deeper into later, Ray had been helping her with a handful of things at the home, and she was scared of what he might say now that she had to fire him. So in hopes of shutting him up for good, she showed up at the courthouse and claimed that he was a menace to society and that he was not in his right mind. So the court decided to hold a sanity hearing over what Belle had told them. However, it didn't go the way Belle had planned. He ended up being proven completely sane and let go, so she decided to take it a step further. She went to the sheriff's office a couple of days later and claimed that Ray had been showing up to her property, threatening her, attacking her, and even though he had never really done these things, she was trying to plant seeds. Because of this, he was arrested for trespassing. However, he obviously got out eventually and, according to her, started causing even more problems. At this point, Andrew Helgelien had been missing for a pretty long time, long enough to alarm his younger brother. His brother wrote to Belle asking where Andrew was, and interestingly enough, Belle actually admitted to seeing Andrew, but also told his brother that he had left the farm already to go visit relatives in Norway. Now, his brother didn't believe this for a split second, and he said there's absolutely no way he would do that without telling me. Where is he? So he told Belle he was going to come down and search for himself because he strongly believed that Andrew was still in LaPorte, Indiana. Belle immediately saw this as an opportunity, being the person she was, and she told Andrew's brother that he was more than welcome to come and look. However, missing persons were very expensive to search for, and she was more than willing to help, but for a hefty price. So she was now basically planning on doing the same thing she did to Andrew to his brother. So they had it all set up that he was going to come in May. However, she then realized the dangerous position she had put herself in. Not only did Ray, her farmhand, see things and help with things that could potentially ruin her entire operation, but a relative of one of the men that went missing off of her farm in the middle of the night was planning on coming down. And those two things together terrified her, and she started feeling incredibly vulnerable. She ended up going to her lawyers very shortly after this conversation and saying that she felt incredibly threatened, that Ray said he was going to burn her house down, that she wanted to go ahead and put a will in, and that's exactly what she did. She wrote up a will, she signed all of her house over to her children, but yet again, she didn't mean any of this. She was just planting seeds and covering herself up. She then went to the bank, paid off the mortgage on her home, and took most of her money out of all of her different bank accounts. Then on April 28th of 1908, just days before Andrew's brother was supposed to arrive, Joe Maxson woke up to smoke engulfing his entire room that was on the second floor of Belle's home. He opened up his door and realized the entire house was on fire and started screaming to Belle and screaming to her children, but when he heard nothing, he realized he had to save himself. So he jumped in nothing but his underwear out of the second floor of her house, second floor window, and then immediately booked it into town trying to ask for help. Again, this man literally ran into town in his underwear. When they finally got back, the entire house was burnt to the ground. There was nothing they could do. They got there too late. 4 bodies were found in the home, which presumably was her 3 children, since her 4th adopted daughter was off at college, and the body of a woman that had no head. And this really confused a lot of people. They assumed it was Belle, but where did her head go? Belle's lawyer immediately called police and said it was Ray. She warned me about this months ago. I knew this was going to end up happening. She said Ray specifically threatened to burn her home down. It had to be him. So Ray was immediately taken in and pretty much charged for this arson. When they examined the body of the woman without her head from the fire, they realized that this woman was only 5'3" and could have only been 150 pounds. And as I said before, that was not Belle. Belle was 6 foot tall and over 200 pounds. So at this point, they think they have an unidentified body that was not Belle, which means where on earth was Belle? The dentist in the town, because there was, I'm pretty sure, only one at this point, then told police that if they somehow could find the skull, he could take dental records and compare them and identify this body for them. So that's what they did. They went back to the farm, which is something they probably wouldn't have done otherwise, and started searching through the debris, and they found a lot more than they had originally thought they would. They started unearthing multiple bodies, which obviously shocked the entire town. I found pictures. It was to the point where the entire town was basically standing around the hole on the ground where her house had been, watching them just pull body after body after body out of the dirt and out of the debris. Then on May 19th, a couple of days later, they found some teeth finally. However, the teeth were in perfect condition, so they assumed they would quickly be able to identify it as Belle and move on. And sure enough, when they went to the dentist, he claimed, yes, that's perfect. She's got the 2 porcelain teeth. I did that for Belle. There's a gold crown tooth. I did that for Belle. She had a lot of dental work and everything matched her. So they identified this woman despite all of her measurements being completely off as Belle, because the teeth they found were a match. Andrew's brother then arrived in LaPorte and was absolutely horrified. And from some things I read, he himself actually uncovered his brother's body, which has to be the most upsetting and distressing feeling in the entire world. Joe, the farmhand, then came forward and said that he had witnessed a couple of very strange things since he had started working there. One day, Belle led him to this area in the hog pen. There was the regular hog pen area, but then there was this area where the fence was a little bit higher than the rest of it, and this was an area where he usually didn't go. And he noticed a few depressions in the ground, almost as if something was buried there. She told him to bring a bunch of dirt and level everything out. She claimed it was just trash, nothing to worry about, so he did it without question. When he told police this, they then started digging there, and they found even more bodies. They found the body of Jenny, who had apparently been off to school, who she more than likely killed because Jenny posed a threat. She had seen too much, she had witnessed too much, so Belle wanted to do away with her. They also found 2 bodies of very small, unidentified children. They guess more than likely that these are 2 children that she might have given birth to, and you know, the same as her first children she ever had. Both of them died as well from mysterious circumstances. They found so many bodies, and while all this is happening as well, they started receiving desperate letters from so many different families claiming that their loved one had left to go and meet a woman in the same area and had never returned home. I'm talking, there is, like person after person after person. I think it was a total of 32 plus people that were like, my so-and-so left and took all of his money and said he was going to meet a woman. You know, this person, I think he might be buried there, like he's never come home. Just these people petrified because they knew the circumstances when their loved one left were the exact same as everyone else who they had identified already. And unfortunately, because of the way the bodies were found, majority of the remains that they did dig up there remain unidentified to this day. Even after all of this though, Ray was still charged with the fire that happened at this home. However, the only thing his lawyers were holding on to was that the body had still not been 100% positively identified as Belle. A jeweler testified in his case saying that the gold crown on Belle's tooth should have melted in the fire, which threw basically a huge wrench in their theory that that body was Belle, which is the only reason Ray was being charged. They even did a reenaction of the entire thing. They put the same sort of porcelain teeth in there, the same gold crown, into a fire. The normal teeth just crumbled. The porcelain teeth became pitted and caved in, and just like the jeweler said should have happened, the gold crown melted. So these teeth were not there when the fire happened. And that's when a bunch of people started coming out saying that this was placed there, that she had paid someone to do it for her, and a lot of questions started being raised. Unfortunately, Ray was still charged and a year later passed away in prison from tuberculosis, but not before admitting a bunch of interesting things. On his deathbed, he admitted to everyone that Belle had in fact killed all of those men, and he knew because he helped her bury them. And usually she would drug their coffee, and while in their drug-induced stupor, she would hit their head with a meat cleaver, killing them. However, other times he said she would change it up, which this story is backed up by the second man who got away. She would have the big meal, spend more time with this person, and let them go to sleep in her home, but she would show up in the middle of the night and chloroform them. And then usually she would, and this is going to be graphic, take them down to her basement and dissect them. She had, in fact, been married to a butcher, and he taught her all sorts of things, so she decided to practice on these human beings that she just killed. Even her disposal methods changed. She would throw some of them into the hog vat and basically burn them alive and then cover them with quicklime to dispose of their body. There was one time, he said, where she was so tired she just chopped the man up and fed them to her pigs. But mostly, she just buried them in her yard, sometimes in bags, sometimes as they were, just kind of dependent on her mood. The headless woman, according to Ray, was a woman that she had just recently, days before the fire, told to come from Chicago to be her housekeeper. According to Ray, she drugged this woman, chopped her head off, pulled her own teeth out, and placed them with this woman's body so they wouldn't be able to positively identify the woman other than the teeth that were in fact her own. He said he knew all this because he and Belle planned to run away together. He said he waited for her after she started the fire, but little did he know she set him up completely. She had been planting seeds that he did it for months. She basically knew exactly what she was doing. She was brilliant in a very disgusting way, and he was basically left to deal with all of this on his own, and she ran off and nobody knew where she went. Now, some people do still believe that this person was her, this headless woman. In 2007 even, they asked some of her sister's descendants if they could unearth this body and test for DNA, but at this point there was too little DNA to do any sort of testing on, so there's still no answers. Belle was reported seen for decades after this in all sorts of major cities all over the place, but there weren't really any more murders until February 9th of 1931 in Los Angeles, where a woman known as Esther Carlson killed her husband using the same poison that she had used multiple times in her murders to collect insurance money. So it was the same motive, same way of killing. Granted, could easily be a copycat killer, but a lot of people are so convinced that this woman is Belle, or was Belle. However, while Esther waited for her trial, she did pass away, but she left very interesting things in her wake. She did have a picture with 3 children that a lot of people think were her own 3 children that she just carried with her after the fire, after she murdered them. And for some reason, no one can really find anything on this woman until after the fire happened. There are a couple of census collections, however, where she does show up once again only after the whole fire happened, but this woman claimed to be about 20 years younger than what Belle was, and as you guys can probably see from the pictures, I don't think she would have been able to pull that off very easily. Belle was, I think, like 50 something when she disappeared, so to pretend she was like a 20 or 30-year-old doesn't seem very likely. And the woman's funeral was held by her sister-in-law, so the sister-in-law also said it was someone she'd known for a while, so no one's really sure if this woman was Belle or not, but I want to know what you guys think. Do you think that was really Belle that died in the fire, or do you think that she ran off? Because she was absolutely brilliant. Again, like I said before, in a disgusting way. She planned things so meticulously. She set Ray up so perfectly. She set Andrew up so perfectly. She got away with so much. I feel like oftentimes you don't really hear of many female serial killers, so when I saw this, I knew I wanted to do a video on it. Let me know what you think down below. I'm so interested to hear what you have to say. Unfortunately, all of the bodies, like I said, were not identified, so many families went without knowing what happened to their loved one. You know, I'm sure most of those people stayed missing because they're still up as missing, even though it's been so long. So unfortunately, I'm sure we can probably say that might be where they ended up, but not having closure must be horrible. That's probably absolutely horrific, and they never were able to bury their loved one or mourn or grieve fully, and that's absolutely heartbreaking. My heart goes out to all of them. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys are excited about this little serial killer series, even though it's going to be much smaller, not still active ones. On that note, I'm gonna go ahead and go, guys. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button. It helps me a lot. And hit that subscribe button to become part of our family. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye.